The band has stopped in the middle of a love song. Crystal glasses are still ringing. My sister is standing under a wall of white roses with one hand locked around her new husband's arm, and my father is at the microphone with a folded card he is no longer reading from. Beside him stands Major General Helena Cross in full dress uniform, ribbons bright under the ballroom lights. No one seems to understand why she is here. Then she turns toward me and says, "Captain Leah Monroe, the Army owes you a public salute." 3 months before that night, my sister called while I was repainting the trim in my kitchen. The windows were open. It was late spring. The air smelled like cut grass and wet wood, and I had a line of white paint across the side of my hand that had already started to dry. When I saw Caroline's name on my phone, I smiled before I answered. That was my mistake. I still thought we were operating from something basic. Blood. Memory. Habit, at the very least. She did not waste time. "Leah, I need to talk about the wedding," she said. Her voice had that careful brightness people use when they've already made a decision and only need you to absorb it politely. In the background, I could hear glassware and the thin laughter of women I did not know. She was probably with Preston's mother. Vivian Hale always sounded like someone setting down expensive dishes. "Okay," I said. "What do you need?" A pause. Just long enough to tell me it was not a small thing. "I think it would be better if you didn't come." I remember the sound the brush made when it slipped from my hand and hit the drop cloth. A wet, soft slap. I remember a truck passing outside. I remember sunlight on the counter. Strange what the mind saves when it does not yet know how much a sentence is going to cost. "I'm sorry," I said. "What?" "Please don't make me do this the hard way." That hurt more than the words themselves. The assumption built into it. As if the difficult part of the situation would be my reaction, not her choice to. I leaned against the sink. My left shoulder, the one that never fully settled after the second surgery, had started aching from holding the phone too tight. Why? Another pause. Then Caroline exhaled. "Because people ask questions, Leah. And because Preston's family is already nervous." Nervous about what? "You know about the article." The article. That old, rotten little piece in the local paper 3 years earlier. Former Army helicopter pilot under review after failed overseas operation. No details. No correction. No follow-up. Just enough to stain. I had never answered it. I had signed papers. I had kept my mouth shut. There were reasons for that. Good reasons. But family has a way of treating silence like an admission when silence inconveniences them. I said, "You're uninviting me because of a newspaper clipping." "It's not just that." "No." "No," her voice sharpened. "It's the way you are now. You go quiet in the middle of things. People don't know what to say to you. I need one day that is simple." That was Caroline. She could take something cruel, dress it in linen, and call it practical. I looked at the small apartment around me. The paint cans. The stacked moving boxes I still had not unpacked. The framed photograph on the shelf of me in uniform with my flight crew, turned slightly inward so guests would not ask questions. I had spent 3 years making myself easier for other people to stand near. Smaller. Cleaner. Less complicated. It had not bought me very much. "What does Mom say?" I asked. Caroline hesitated. Not because she disagreed. Because she was deciding how honest to be. She thinks it may be for the best. I laughed once. It sounded flat. Of course she does. She said you'd understand. Did she? "Leah, please. Don't make this ugly." I looked at my hand. White paint drying over my knuckles like chalk. "I won't," I said. "You already did." She hung up first. That evening I drove to my parents' house because anger is one thing over the phone, and something else in a lit kitchen where the silverware drawer still sticks on the left side. My mother, Elaine Monroe, was trimming flowers at the table. Hydrangeas. Blue and white. Caroline's wedding colors. She did not look surprised to see me. "We were going to call tomorrow," she said. "No," I said. Caroline already called. My father, Thomas Monroe, was by the back door in his work boots, one hand resting on the frame as if he had stopped midway through coming inside. He had spent 27 years in the army and another 10 learning how to be still in civilian clothes. He had a face that did not move much unless it had reason to. Mom kept clipping stems. "Caroline is under pressure," she said. "You know how these families can be." "These families?" I asked. "You know what I mean." "Yes," I said.
Idag.
What I meant was that I knew exactly how often my mother bent around status when she thought no one was looking. Caroline came in from the hallway in a silk blouse with half her hair pinned up from a dress fitting. She saw me and stopped. Not guilty. Annoyed. "I said I didn't want a scene," she said. "And yet here we are." She folded her arms. "Leah, this is my wedding. And I'm your sister. You are also someone people whisper about." My father's jaw tightened. Just once. That was the only visible sign that I turned to him anyway. "Are you going to say anything?" He looked at me, and something in his face was not indifference. It was restraint. At the time, I hated him for it. Finally, he said, "Not in this room." That was all that I left before I said something I could not take back. Gravel snapped under my boots. The evening air was warm and smelled like honeysuckle from the fence line. I was halfway to my truck when my father came out after me carrying a small cedar box. He handed it to me without explanation. Inside was one old bronze challenge coin from my unit, worn smooth at the edge, and a folded slip of paper with a name and number written in his narrow block handwriting. "Colonel Miriam Vance." I looked up at him. "I kept my word while it was your silence to keep," he said. "It stopped being that when they started using it against you." I held the coin in my palm. Cold. Heavy. Familiar. "What is this?" "The beginning," he said. "A.T. Fort Liberty. Colonel Miriam Vance met me in a legal office that smelled of paper, burnt coffee, and floor wax. The blinds were half-drawn against the noon glare, and there was a stack of brown record folders on the corner of her desk that looked as if they had been opened and reopened by careful hands. She stood when I came in. "Captain Leah Monroe," she said. "Formerly Army Aviation." "Formerly," I said. She studied me for a moment. Not unkindly. Then she gestured toward the chair across from her. "Your father told me you might call if your family finally forced the issue." The sentence landed quietly. It told me two things at once. First, that my father had been preparing for this. Second, that he had prepared without pressuring me. I sat down slowly. "What issue exactly?" Colonel Vance opened the top folder and turned it toward me. The first page was my service record. My name, my rank, my wings, my medical separation date. Beneath that sat an internal memo with so much black ink over it that it looked burned. "The issue," she said, "is that your silence has been mistaken for disgrace." I looked at the redactions. This material was sealed. Part of it still is. Then why am I here? Because the review board released enough for correction, and because your father asked the right question. What question? She met my eyes. Whether the Army intended to let a false story finish the job that combat started. That room got very still, I said. "The article said I was under review after an operational failure." "You were under review," she said, "but not for misconduct, not for cowardice, not for negligence." She slid a second page across the desk. It was an after-action summary. I recognized the date before I recognized anything else. The paper trembled in my fingers. I had not seen that date in 3 years. Colonel Vance tapped a line that remained visible. "Command Initiative preserved life under degraded flight conditions." Did I read it twice? That's all they cleared? For now. I looked up. "Then tell me straight." She folded her hands. "You were placed under protective silence because the mission involved non-public extractions tied to ongoing intelligence cooperation. Some passengers could not be discussed. Some routes could not be discussed. Some decisions could not be defended in the open without endangering people still alive. And the Army let people assume the worst." Yes. She did not soften it. I respected that. "Why?" "Because institutions protect themselves quickly," she said. "They correct themselves slowly." Outside the window, a flag rope struck a metal pole in the wind. Sharp. Repetitive. Like a timer, I asked, "Why now?" Because the last classified name connected to that operation was cleared 6 weeks ago. And because Lieutenant Colonel Peter Sloan from the Decorations Branch reopened your case. My case. The one that should never have been buried. I stared at her. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. Her voice lowered a fraction. Your father did. That was my first real surprise. Colonel Vance reached into the folder and removed one small evidence bag. Inside was my old pilot's kneeboard, blackened at one corner. The elastic strap scorched through. I had not seen it since the desert. My throat closed. We recovered this from archived effects, she said. Chief Warrant Officer for Daniel Ruiz asked me to give it to you in person if the file ever reopened. He's waiting in Hangar 3 if you're ready. Hangar 3 had been converted into a training museum on one side and maintenance storage on the other. The air inside held that old mix of hydraulic fluid, dust, canvas, and sun-baked metal that used to live in my clothes for days after a flight. For a second, standing there under the steel beams, I was 29 again and tired in a way civilians never quite understand. Chief Warrant Officer for Daniel Ruiz was standing beside a grounded Black Hawk with his hands in his pockets. He looked older, narrower through the shoulders, but he still had the same deliberate way of turning when he heard footsteps, like a man trained not to waste motion. Monroe, he said. Ruiz. He nodded once, then looked at the kneeboard in my hand. Figured they'd finally hand that back when the world ran out of excuses. We walked to a folding table near the rear of the hangar where he had laid out copies of flight logs, weather sheets, and a laminated route map marked in grease pencil. The map was mine. My handwriting ran across the bottom margin in tight block letters. Alternate corridor if smoke rises east. I had forgotten writing it. Or maybe I had buried it. Ruiz tapped the map. Operation Marlowe wasn't what the manifest said it was. I know that much now. He took a breath. The official bird was supposed to lift 2 wounded contractors and a security officer. That's what the clean paperwork showed. What it didn't show was the extra load. I said nothing, he said it for me. 3 children. 1 translator's wife. 1 intel courier nobody wanted named on paper. You found that out after Wheels Up. The hangar suddenly felt too hot that I looked at the route line. I told command the weight balance was wrong. You did. They told me to fly. They did. I traced the scorched corner of the map with my thumb. Ruiz continued in the same even voice. Dust came in fast. Lead ship lost visibility. Then we took ground fire near the wash. Not heavy. Enough. Enough to turn bad choices permanent. My chest felt tight in that old familiar way. What do you need me to remember? I asked if he looked at me for a long time. The part where you kept thinking instead of panicking. I gave him a hard look. Daniel. He did not flinch. You lost tail response on touchdown, he said. The bird listed. Keller broke his wrist. Warren was trying to keep one of the contractors from bleeding out on the floor. The translator was screaming for his little girl.
And you, he stopped.
Not for effect. Because memory costs. And I what? Ruiz pointed to the map. You rewrote the route on the hood of the avionics panel with half the instruments failing. Then you sent the security officer with the first group and stayed behind to reload the children because no one else knew the wait order. I stared at him. I wasn't supposed to stay.
No, he said.
You were supposed to save yourself cleanly and explain the rest later. The hangar hummed around us. Was that in the review? Parts of it. Enough to clear me? Enough to start. He reached into a folder and handed me a copy of the mission log. At the bottom was one visible line beneath the black marker bars. Pilot elected re-entry after impact to recover unlisted dependents. Unlisted dependents. That was how paper says children when paper is ashamed of itself. I folded the log carefully. Ruiz watched me do it. Leah, he said, quieter now. You were never under review because you failed. You were under review because the clean version of the mission couldn't survive the truth. I wanted to answer, but the words did not come. Not yet. 2 days later, I drove to Asheville to see Captain Elise Warren. Elise had been our flight medic. She lived now in a narrow blue house near the edge of town with a vegetable garden out front and a brass bell hanging beside the porch door. When she opened it, she leaned slightly on the frame before stepping back. Some wounds don't announce themselves in bandages. They live in the fraction of a second it takes someone to settle their weight. We sat in her kitchen with mugs of tea going cold between us. Rain tapped against the window over the sink. Her golden retriever slept under the table and thumped its tail once when I shifted my boots. "You still take your tea too hot?" she asked. "I still forget to wait."
She smiled at that.
Then it was gone. "I heard about Caroline," she said. I looked up. "My father told you? He came here before you did." That stopped me. When? A month ago. Drove 5 hours. Sat at this same table. She touched the rim of her mug. "He didn't ask me to protect your feelings. He asked me if I was willing to tell the truth when the time came." I looked down at my hands. There was a scar at the base of my thumb where a metal latch had torn skin during a hard landing years earlier. I had not noticed until then how white it still was. "What did you tell him?" "That I owed you more than silence." Elise stood and went to a drawer by the fridge. She came back with a photograph sealed in clear plastic. The edges were singed. In the picture, 6 figures stood beside a helicopter at dawn. Exhaustion.
Dust.
Blankets over shoulders. One of the children was asleep against my chest. My face was half turned away. "I kept this because nobody else wanted proof that looked untidy," she said, and I took the photo carefully. "She was the translator's daughter," Elise said, touching the sleeping child with one finger through the plastic. "Nadia." I stared at the image. I remembered her hair, stiff with grit. I remembered the heat of her cheek through my flight suit. I did not remember anyone taking the photograph. "Elise, what happened after they moved us out?" Her eyes shifted toward the window. The translator and his family were folded into a resettlement channel. New names. New city. The courier disappeared the way those people always disappear, which is to say, successfully. Keller gave a statement. Ruiz gave 3. You gave 1, and then signed the rest away. I remember signing. You also remember why. I nodded once that if those names came loose too early, people died. It had been that simple. Still was. Elise reached for her mug, but did not drink. "There's more," she said. "The article didn't just happen. Someone in public affairs needed a placeholder explanation while the review sat sealed. Operational failure was broad enough to satisfy curiosity and vague enough to protect details. They traded your name for time. That sat in the room between us." "And the citation?" I asked. She held my gaze. "It went up anyway." "What citation?" Elise answered without ceremony. "The Distinguished Flying Cross. For heroism during aerial flight." She saw something move in my face and added, "It stalled because the witness packets named people who couldn't exist on paper yet." I looked down at the burned photograph again. 3 years, I said. "I know. Did you think I should have fought harder?" Elise's answer came fast. "No. I think you chose not to save yourself with somebody else's grave." Rain slid down the window in slow, crooked lines. Before I left, she handed me one more thing. A voice recorder the size of a deck of cards. "Keller made notes after surgery," she said. "He died last year. Heart issue. Unrelated. But he kept talking about that night like he thought somebody would need the straight version." In the truck, I sat with the recorder in my palm for 10 full minutes before pressing play. Keller's voice came through rough and tired. "If Monroe hadn't gone back for the kids, we have had bodies instead of paperwork. Put that somewhere official, if the Army ever remembers how." I turned it off and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. Silence is not surrender. I had told myself that for years. That afternoon it felt less like comfort and more like a demand. By the time I got home, the wedding had grown teeth. The planner called first. Not Caroline. Not my mother. A woman named Shauna with a smooth professional voice and no room in it for shame. "Ms. Monroe," she said, "there seems to be some confusion regarding your attendance." "There isn't," I said. "I've been asked to clarify that the family has finalized seating." "Have they?"
Yes.
"And given the sensitivity around prior misunderstandings, they would prefer that no unexpected additions appear in family photos." Unexpected additions. I almost admired the phrasing. It took skill to make a daughter sound like spilled wine. "Tell Caroline I understand perfectly," I said, and ended the call. An hour later, my mother left a voicemail asking me not to escalate things. She never said I was wronged, only that I might make things harder. That night, Colonel Vance called again. "I need you in Raleigh tomorrow," she said. "Lieutenant Colonel Peter Sloan is in from the decorations branch." I drove through rain most of the way. The interstate was one long ribbon of spray and headlights, and by the time I reached the federal building, my shoulders felt like stone. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Sloan was younger than I expected, all clean lines and tired eyes behind thin glasses. He shook my hand and went straight to work. People who deal with buried records often do. They know emotion is already in the room. He placed a slim binder in front of me. "This is not the final packet," he said, "but it is the first one I can show you." Inside were witness statements.
Ruiz.
Warren. Keller. One from an intelligence liaison whose name was still blacked out. At the top of the draft recommendation was the award Elise had named. Distinguished Flying Cross. That I read the words without quite feeling them. Sloan spoke carefully. Captain Monroe, the original recommendation was suspended because corroborating details involved protected persons and ongoing partnerships. That suspension should have triggered periodic review. It did not. Because nobody wanted to reopen it. He gave the smallest nod. Because nobody wanted to be the one who admitted delay had become neglect. I turned a page. There was my name again. Then a sentence from Ruiz's statement. Monroe maintained aircraft control beyond safe threshold, re-entered impact zone twice, and prioritized dependent extraction over self-evacuation. My fingers tightened on the paper. Why reopen it now? Because Colonel Vance pushed. Because General Cross agreed. And because your father sent a letter that cut through 6 layers of polite avoidance. I looked up sharply. My father wrote to the board? Sloan pulled a copy from the back. IT was 1 page. Army-style plain.
No ornament.
No pleading. My daughter kept her silence because the Army asked her to. You do not get to hold that silence against her once it becomes inconvenient to your paperwork. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Thomas J. Monroe, Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army, retired. Sloan let me read. Then he said, he also enclosed the newspaper article. I almost smiled. Why? He wrote in the margin, if you can let this circulate, you can issue a correction with the same efficiency. That sounded exactly like him. I closed the binder. So, what happens now? Sloan's answer was precise. If the final witness confirmation is accepted, General Cross can approve public recognition. Not the full operational detail, not every name, but enough to restore the truth. Before the wedding? He met my eyes over the table. Yes. I went to my father's house the next evening with that letter folded in my coat pocket. He was in the garage sanding the handle of an old wooden shovel, the radio low by the workbench. The place smelled like machine oil, sawdust, and the coffee he always forgot to finish. His dress shoes for the wedding sat in a box near the door, still wrapped in tissue. He looked up when I came in, then set the sandpaper down. You saw it, he said. Yes. He wiped his hands on a cloth. I stood there for a moment, suddenly younger than I wanted to feel. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He did not pretend not to understand. Because the first time you came home, you said you were tired of people trying to make you explain your pain in language they could digest. You said if you wanted help, you'd ask. I did say that. And you didn't ask. He leaned against the bench. So I waited. I swallowed. In that kitchen, when Caroline said what she said, I thought you were just standing there. I was standing there, he said. I was also deciding whether this was still your burden to manage privately, or whether the family had turned it into something I needed to answer as a father. The radio hummed softly between us. I'm sorry, I said, for what I thought. He shook his head once. You were hurt. Hurt people read silence badly. That line stayed with me. He opened a drawer in the workbench and took out a white envelope. Inside was my original invitation. Heavy paper. Cream stock. My name in Caroline's handwriting. The formal inner card had been sliced straight through with a paper cutter. He handed it to me. She brought them over for dressing, he said. This one never made it into the stack. I ran my thumb over my own name. Did you keep it on purpose? Yes. Why? Because I had a feeling I would need proof that exclusion is often planned long before it is explained. Only my father could make that sentence sound ordinary. He reached again into the drawer and took out his old dress mess cufflinks, the ones with the army crest worn thin from years of storage. "Saturday," he said, placing them in my hand. "Come to the reception." "Caroline doesn't want me there." "That's true." "You're walking her down the aisle." "That's also true." I looked at him. He held my gaze without blinking. "I will not give away one daughter by pretending I do not have another." There was no drama in the way he said it. That was what made it final. I turned the cuff links over in my palm.
Cool metal.
"Old wait. What are you planning?" He gave the faintest breath through his nose. Nearly a smile. "Not quite. Enough." 2 days later, Colonel Vance called me into a secure records room just off the base legal wing. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The air was cold enough to make the skin on my forearms tighten. Lieutenant Colonel Sloan was already there with headphones and a typed transcript clipped to a board. "We got partial clearance on the cockpit audio," he said, and I felt my stomach drop. "I don't know if I want to hear it." "You don't have to." Colonel Vance spoke from the far side of the table. "But if you do, it will answer the one thing your family has been allowed to doubt." That did it. I sat down and put on the headphones. Static first. Rotor noise. Then voices layered over each other, clipped and strained. Ruiz calling wind. Keller swearing. Someone crying in a language I did not speak. Then my own voice, flatter than I remembered, steady in a way that made me grip the edge of the table. "Move the wounded first." Static. Negative, we're overweight. More static. Then me again. Then I go back. "Open the left side." "Warren, keep pressure."
Ruiz, rirait kourider.
"Children last on count, first on reload." I closed my eyes. There was another burst of noise, metal on metal. Then my voice one final time, closer to the mic, almost calm. "I can hold." "Move." When the audio stopped, the room remained silent for several seconds. I took the headphones off and stared at the transcript. On the bottom margin, in neat typed text, was Keller's confirmation from the medical ward. Pilot Monroe re-entered impact site after order to disengage and personally loaded final dependents under active threat. I touched the line once. I don't remember saying any of that.
Colonel Vance en soir de Kietli.
That doesn't make it less true. Sloan slid one last paper toward me. "Final recommendation approval pending public reading by commanding officer." Beneath it was the signature block for Major General Helena Cross. Why would a Major General do this herself? I asked. Sloan closed the binder. Because once she read the file, she said the Army had hidden behind classification long enough. On the morning of the wedding, I told myself I was only going for my father. I wore a dark blue dress with sleeves to the wrist because old scars still make strangers stare, and weddings are already crowded with strangers. The reception was at the Hale Country Club, all white columns and polished floors and waiters moving like clockwork. The air inside smelled of garden roses, champagne, and money spent to make effort look effortless. I entered through the side corridor like someone reporting for a duty she had not volunteered for. My father had arranged that. Fewer eyes, less theater. But families sense disruption the way horses sense weather. I saw my mother first. She was near the escort card table in silver satin, speaking to Vivian Hale. When her eyes found me, the words in her mouth stopped. Vivian turned, followed her gaze, and went visibly still. Then Caroline came out from the bridal suite. Her gown was elegant. Of course it was. She had worked for a year to make herself look like certainty. When she saw me, her whole body seemed to harden from the shoulders down. "I told you not to come," she said, keeping her voice low only because guests were nearby. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Before I could answer, my father stepped in between us. Not aggressively, not loudly. He simply moved, and the center of the hallway changed. "I asked her to come," he said. Caroline looked at him in disbelief. No." "Yes. You cannot do this now." He adjusted the cuff of his jacket. A small motion. Controlled. "I am doing it now because you left no better time." Vivian Hale approached, all cool pearls and practiced authority. "Thomas," she said, "if there is a family matter, perhaps it can wait until after the speeches." My father turned to her. Mrs. Hale, the family matter is that one branch of this family decided dignity was optional if the guest list became inconvenient. Vivian actually stepped back. My mother reached for his sleeve. Thomas, please. He looked at her, and his face did not rise. It settled. No, he said. Not this time. At the far end of the corridor, the ballroom doors opened. Guests were being guided toward their tables. Music swelled. Somewhere inside, glasses clinked and chairs scraped. Then I saw Colonel Vance enter with Lieutenant Colonel Sloan behind her. A second later, Major General Helena Cross came through the front lobby in dress uniform, moving with the unmistakable calm of someone accustomed to rooms changing when she enters them. Caroline followed my stare, and the color left her face. My father handed me back the invitation with my slice name on it. Stand where you can hear, he said. Then he walked into the ballroom with a general at his shoulder. By the time the first course had been cleared, the ballroom had relaxed into the easy noise of expensive celebrations, silverware, laughter, the low blur of a string quartet between songs. Caroline and Preston were at the center table beneath an arch of white roses, receiving the kind of attention new couples mistake for blessing because it is warm and directed their way. Then my father rose for the toast. He stood at the microphone with one index card in his hand and waited until the room settled. It took longer than it should have. People rarely understand the difference between a speech and a reckoning until the second sentence. He began simply. I was asked tonight to speak about marriage. A few polite smiles. A few lifted glasses. He looked toward Caroline. Then toward Preston. Then he set the card down on the table beside the microphone. But before I speak about marriage, he said, I need to speak about honor. The room changed. The head table. Caroline's hand froze around her wine stem. My mother went perfectly still. Vivian Hale's smile vanished in stages, as if it had to be removed piece by piece. My father continued, I have 2 daughters. Not one. And I will not give away one daughter, while allowing the other to be treated like a stain the family learned to place behind a closed door. No one moved. Even the waiters had stopped. Caroline whispered, Dad. He did not look at her. For 3 years, he said, my eldest daughter was judged by a story she was not free to correct. Some of you repeated that story. Some of you benefited from not asking harder questions. Some of you decided her silence meant shame. Then he turned and extended one hand toward the rear of the ballroom where I stood near the service doors. Leah, he said, come forward. The room opened as I walked. Not out of kindness. Out of surprise, my heels made almost no sound on the polished floor. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. The chandeliers were hot above us. The roses smelled too sweet. Somewhere a fork fell and struck a plate. When I reached the front, my father stepped aside. Major General Helena Cross came to the microphone. Her uniform caught the light in hard, clean lines. She did not smile. This was not that kind of moment. I am Major General Helena Cross, United States Army, she said. I am here because the Army allowed an incomplete public story to stand where the truth should have stood. Across the room, I heard Preston's father exhale sharply. A man at table 8 set his glass down without drinking. Caroline looked as if she had forgotten how to arrange her face. General Cross opened a folder. Captain Leah Monroe did not leave Army service under disgrace. She served as a helicopter pilot during a protected extraction under hostile conditions. When aircraft control degraded, communication failed, and undeclared dependents were found on board, Captain Monroe re-entered the impact zone after ordered disengagement and completed the evacuation. She paused. Let the words land. 12 people lived because she refused the cleaner choice. No one in that room had anything to say to that. General Cross turned one page. Because parts of that mission remained classified, public correction was delayed. That delay became injustice. The Army is correcting that tonight. My father was standing beside me now. Not touching me. Just there. Steady. General Cross read the citation in a voice that carried to the back wall. For heroism and extraordinary achievement during aerial flight, in the face of enemy threat, at grave risk to her own life, Captain Leah Monroe is awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The words passed through the room like weather. Then she closed the folder, stepped down from the microphone, faced me squarely, and rendered a formal salute. "Captain Monroe," she said, loud enough for every table to hear, "the Army remembers." I returned it because training lives in the body even when grief has tried to erase it. My father took the microphone once more. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "If my daughter was too inconvenient for your seating chart," he said, "then my blessing was too costly for your stage." Then he placed his father of the bride's speech on the table and walked away from it. That was the moment the balance changed. Not because anyone shouted, not because anyone fainted or ran. Because truth entered the room in full uniform, and all the old private judgments suddenly looked small under direct light. The band did not resume for a long time, after the applause died, and there was applause, though it arrived late and sounded ashamed. The room broke into small stunned pockets of movement. A few veterans crossed over to shake my hand. One older man touched 2 fingers to his brow and said nothing at all. That meant more than most speeches. Preston came first from the family side. He stopped an arm's length away, loosened his tie slightly, and looked at me the way decent men look when they realize they have stood too close to cowardice without naming it. "I should have asked Caroline more questions," he said. "Yes," I told him. "You should have." He nodded once.
Took it.
Then stepped back. My mother approached next, slowly, as if every foot of carpet had to be negotiated separately. Her lipstick was still perfect. Her eyes were not. "I did not know," she said. "There are some sentences that are true and still not enough." "You knew I was hurting," I said. "You just found that less important than how it looked." She opened her mouth, closed it again. That, at least, was honest. My father was standing near the sidebar with a glass of water untouched in his hand. He was talking quietly with General Cross, but his eyes flicked toward me every few seconds out of old habit. "Check the perimeter. Check your people. Some lessons survive retirement." Then Caroline came. She was still in her gown, still beautiful in the formal sense. But the certainty was gone. Her face looked younger without it. Not softer, just less defended. "I didn't know," she said, the same words my mother had used, but with a different wound inside them. That I looked at her. "No," I said. "You didn't ask."